Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We will get started with the third of four YouTube live information sessions about the Pat Tillman fellowship program, really, in terms of very much focusing in on different things to consider when you are considering applying to become a Tillman Scholar. Now, in terms of starting with the big picture again, and just to review a couple of the things that we talked about in previous sessions, the bottom line from the Foundation's perspective, when we're looking at the future class of Tillman Scholars, is we're looking for talent, right? Our mission is to unite and empower remarkable military veterans and spouses. That is at the heart of what we're doing. So we are looking for impact. We're looking for veterans and spouses who demonstrate and very much imbue the values of our foundation and who are willing to engage with a vibrant community. We're looking for human beings that can both simultaneously benefit as well as contribute to that community of Tillman Scholars, and a remarkable community it certainly is. So in the big picture of things, we don't view the naming of a Tillman Scholar or the awarding of a scholarship or the associated professional development opportunities and the network that comes with that honor. We don't look at that as an award or a reward for things done solely in the past. At the heart of the matter, we are looking to invest in somebody that has a track record, but then also someone that has a vision to make our world a better place. Now, a key part of that search for talent, that search for remarkableness among our veterans and military spouse communities, a key part of that search is actually what a recommender can provide. And that's the topic of today's information session. For those that joined with us last time, we talked really about the heart of the application, which are two 400-word essays, right? And one of the key things that we emphasize there are going to be some points of continuity in terms of what we'll emphasize about a recommender. And two of the points that we emphasized last time was taking the time to revise those essays, as well as then using those essays to tie together a lot of different information that application is offering. And that notion of time, as well as that notion of tying things together, is really going to carry over to some of our broad thoughts about considerations to put in the forefront of your mind as you begin the application process, and then think about who is best positioned and how that person can offer the most effective recommendation for you as you apply. Now, we're getting close to that application season, right? On February 1st, 2020, that's a Saturday at midnight, the application will open. And one of the first things I want to emphasize, in fact, my point number one for today, is as soon as that application opens, you're able to get into your application. Step one should actually be going down to the task which says request a recommender, and do that first. Sign up, get all of your initial basic information in first that will allow you to get to that next step, and then go down and look for the specific task that talks about your recommendation. Get your recommender started early. And even before the 1st of February, I would recommend that you take the time to talk to whomever you think knows you best, particularly in a professional sense, that could offer insight and complement the other things that you're attempting to convey within your application. Talk to them now, and then as soon as you can, early in February, jump right in, that task will request a recommendation from that person that you've been talking to. So that's step number one that I would recommend. Get your recommender started early. The second point I would emphasize is to stay in contact with that recommender. Not only now, even prior to the application opening, but as importantly, once you submit and once you send that request for the recommendation. The way the application tool online, it's through a process that's called SurveyMonkey Apply. The way that works, as soon as you hit the button that requests that recommendation, your recommender, as long as you input the correct email address, should receive an email within minutes. This is some of the testing that we're confirming right now here at the Foundation, but that is one of the points that's important, I think, for everyone to understand. So if you remain in contact with your recommender, as you submit that recommendation, if for some reason they have not seen it, I would have them double check their spam mail. And on some email systems, it might get routed to that spam. But again, I think it's important for us to convey to everyone that's interested that that you should expect that recommender receive that notification within minutes. So stay in contact with them to make sure that they're able to get set up into the system, that they don't have any questions along those lines, particularly in the technical sense. Now, in terms of technicalities, that's actually my point number 3. If you or your recommender experience any difficulties or technical glitches or points of friction at all, reach out to the SurveyMonkey Apply Customer Support Center. When you are in that system online, it'll be in the upper right-hand corner. There will be a help button that you can click, and that is something to convey to your recommender as well. Some of the points that we're emphasizing here in terms of time, some of the points that we're emphasizing here in terms of remaining in contact and talking with those recommenders, as well as then using the customer support piece, is really my 4th point. And you will not be able to complete your application to potentially become a Tillman Scholar until that recommendation is complete. So it requires you, once your recommender hits save and submit, after that, you have to have ample time to go back into SurveyMonkey Apply, open up your application, and you have to hit save and submit for your application in its totality. So since you cannot submit until your recommender is complete, the absolute last thing that we want to have happen is a recommender potentially not being able to complete that recommendation until 11:57 p.m. Pacific time on February 29th, which is an important date because that would be 3 minutes right before the application closes. Again, so it opens on February 1st, closes on February 29th, but you are going to have enough time after that recommender submits the recommendation to go in, save, and complete your application. That is a key step. So again, that would be my point number 4 to emphasize very, very strongly to anyone and everyone who's interested that you cannot submit your application until your recommender is complete along those lines. Now, the 5th point that I'll offer, and again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to start to populate those questions within the live chat column that should be on the right-hand side of your screen. The 5th point I want to emphasize is that when we are in that search for talent, again, when we are in the search for remarkable veterans and spouses that have an impact, think about the story that you want to tell. Right? It relates back to the 400-word essays, the 2 400-word essays, which are a very limited amount of space that you have to be able to tell a story. But I would encourage people to think about a recommender that can provide a complementary message that, again, reinforces the points that you are seeking and the points that you are emphasizing. So that means that needs to be somebody that knows you well. It means it needs to be someone that can provide an authentic account of how you have a proven track record and how, most importantly, you can achieve an impact in the future. So again, I will stop talking here. We'll spend the rest of this time addressing some questions. I see some of the questions are already starting to populate, but I'll just again re-emphasize my 5 points. 1, get started on this early, particularly get your recommenders started on this early. Point number 2, stay in contact with your recommender. I would, to be frank, even from now until that recommendation is complete. Point number 3, any difficulties whatsoever, reach out to SurveyMonkey Apply Customer Support. 4 is that reminder, you cannot submit until that recommendation is complete. And 5, and this is a little bit in terms of the style and some of the substance, I would recommend folks to seek a complementary perspective and a complementary message that, again, helps to underscore the message you want to send to the selection committees that will be reviewing your application throughout March and April. So with that, I'll start to look at a couple of these questions that are loading in. One first question there, are we able to submit more than 1 character recommendation? And the answer to that is no. We are only requesting one character recommendation. Another important point, particularly as you communicate with those recommenders, it's not a letter of recommendation that recommender writes solely on their own. Once you submit their information to include their email, they will then have a series of questions that they will be asked about you. And they will reply to those questions. They usually have about 150 to 200 word allocation of responses to a couple of prompts about you that they will respond to. But to answer that question directly, only one recommendation along those lines. Second question is about the disbursement of the actual scholarship, asking if there's an instance where the program is fully funded. I'll answer that here in just a second, but questions like that, actually, and that tone, not that tone, but that sort of topic is going to be one of the questions we're going to address in our final information session, which we'll host on February the 11th, 11:30 Central Time. The answer is it depends. In some cases, some programs can be fully funded, but again, the average amount of that scholarship is $11,000. The thing where it would be fully funded is that some scholars in the past, that is their only requirement that's been there. But again, for your planning purposes, plan for $10,000 to $11,000 as our average scholarship award, and that has been the case over the past few years. Someone's next sort of question that's on there, considering who can speak best about a proven track record. It's somebody within your family, and that was also a mentor and veteran themselves. That's actually a really important question along those lines, and that is the type of question, right? Really, it's a mentor and a veteran that's also a family member. How would that be frowned upon? That's an important question in terms of tone, I think, for an applicant and a recommender to talk about, right? In terms of establishing, and that's one of the things that they will actually have to respond to within the recommender of describe how you know this particular applicant. I think that's an important piece, right? You're looking for clarity, you're looking for authenticity along those lines. If it is somebody that has been a clear mentor and is speaking along those lines, I think that's a fair piece. I think the question to ask is, when somebody reads that description of how they know you, what is the thing that comes out most? Is it that sort of mentorship relationship that is prioritized, or is it the familial relationship that's prioritized on that? And I think that's a balance and a judgment that an applicant is going to have to look for. But I think that's a very key question to ask, and to ask early, and to talk through that with a recommender along those lines. There's a question on there in terms of the essay prompts being released before February 1st. They will not. Those prompts, you will be able to see those once you log in on February 1st. That is just our standard practice along those lines. I also see that if you see some answers in here coming from scholarships at Pat Tillman Foundation, that is our scholarships manager that's also helping us address some of these questions as well. She can also answer key questions as the application opens, things along those lines. Technical questions, however, again, go to SurveyMonkey, apply customer support along those lines. A question about committees looking at a recommendation from somebody in academia today, more so than a former supervisor who could speak about ethic capabilities back in the military. Again, we would go back and if you look in our frequently asked questions on the website, some of the key things we continually emphasize is somebody who knows you best, right? So if you are, and there's a lot of different ways to balance and mitigate these different things, right? So if you make a choice to go back to a former supervisor who really knows you well, understand how they can complement what you're saying in your entire application, right? So if that is a trade-off, then with some of your current academic work, well, there's other parts of the application that you might be able to mitigate that trade-off along those lines. But again, as a general rule, I think it is probably a best practice for any applicant to really refer back to somebody who knows them best, really within their character, within your ability to have an impact somewhere. Those are the big order questions I think that help to probably underscore and for you to consider when you are addressing that question. That's right there. Let's see a couple of other questions that are coming in. If applying to graduate school and you're not planning on completing a FAFSA, is a SAR still needed? Ultimately, with the application, the answer is yes. Along those lines, we would require that. But I also want to emphasize is that information, whether it comes from a FAFSA, whether it comes from a letter from the actual school you're applying to, which also underscores that you are not seeking federal assistance, or information from the SAR, the selection committees do not see that information. That information isn't opened up or considered until after scholars are selected, because again, this is a purely merit-based selection process. So we will sometimes look at that information when we're determining a specific award amount, and that's why our average scholarship award is an average, and it varies from scholar to scholar, but the selection is purely merit-based, which again, I think is an important piece to emphasize with your recommender, right? They then need to be talking about merit. You need to be focused on merit throughout all the entire application as well. And I think that's a very great question, and I think a good point to fully understand. Another question there in terms of applying for a business certification. Some of the key eligibility requirements for the Tillman Scholars Program is a degree producing program, right? So you have to be applying and ultimately accepted and enrolled in a program that produces a degree. That can be a bachelor's degree. It can be, let me clarify, it was a bachelor's degree or higher. It has to be a bachelor's degree, it can be a master's degree, any form of doctorate, be it a PhD, MD, Juris Doctorate, anything above bachelor's degree, but purely a certification is not eligible for the Tillman Scholars Program that's there. So let's see, there couple of other questions that are coming in. Let me scroll through, excuse me, please just bear with me. I see that in case anybody missed it, Scholarships Act emphasized in that you do need to have a new recommendation every year. They are going to have, even if it's the same recommender from a previous submission, we will need to have that come in on this new form. So again, that's a key piece in terms of not only an applicant's understanding of that, but I'd also want to reemphasize the point that the recommender needs to understand that as well. So again, generally, the questions that the recommenders are asked from year to year are generally the same. They're going to be very similar as they have been in years past, in case it is a repeat recommender. But again, other things might have changed. There might be other points that you want to emphasize as an applicant. And again, that goes back to that fifth sort of point that I made earlier, that you really want to be able to seek a complementary message that your recommender is able to come out and offer to your application. When the selection committees meet throughout the process, a lot of the discussion focuses in on those essays that we talked about last time, and a significant amount of discussion will oftentimes focus in on what the recommenders are offering as well. So when you think broadly, you have those essays, you have a huge amount of ability on your own merit to be able to influence your fate, right? The recommenders also have a key aspect that's there. So I think it makes sense to think about that comprehensively and broadly, to share with that recommender in a series of conversations some of the different points that you want to emphasize. I offered my big five earlier. I think some other things to keep in mind as you work your way through the application process is, again, this notion of time, right? A month seems like a long time, but it will go by quickly, particularly if you're asking a recommender that has a lot of responsibilities. The ability to talk to others, right? Again, early on, we constantly, from the foundation's point, emphasize talking to us, talking to Tillman scholars that are there, and then this third piece of tying everything in as much as possible as we look at things. So there's a question about how committees view applicants who have partially completed their degree program as applicants or are viewed as an investment. I'm assuming that question is very much sort of focused in if you are, say, in the second of a 3 or 4 year program along those lines. The guidance and a lot of the discussion that the committee looks at very much comes back to those opening comments I made. They're looking literally for remarkable military veterans and spouses. So they're looking for that aspect of impact, that aspect of talent. Where someone is in their program it sometimes comes up, but it's usually not at the forefront and the real meat of those discussions that are going on at that point in time. If you look at Tillman Scholars as a whole, when you look on our website, look down there, those 635 scholars, some had, the entirety of their degree, received assistance throughout their entirety of their degree from the foundation. Others got in the very last year. So there's a pretty wide variance along those lines. There's a question in terms of someone's completed their master's, but then we'll be picking up a PhD in the fall. The application period that will open in February does apply to the fall semester. That is just the mechanics of how that works. To be quite frank, at the end of the whole selection cycle, that really then ends as scholarship checks depart the foundation in late July, with the destination of bursars and registrar offices at the universities that scholars are attending as they are starting into that fall semester. So that is correct. Some examples of strong recommenders in terms of titles, roles, and if their seniority impacts the perception of the influence within selection. Seniority and titles are actually less important than the authenticity that a recommender is able to develop. It just is. Selection committees are comprised of a combination of some veterans. They're comprised of Tillman scholars. They're comprised of friends of the foundation. In some cases, friends of Pat himself sometimes sit on these committees. So we have a balance of folks within those committees. Part of the reason that veterans are there to help decipher military jargon, to be quite frank. But when it comes down to the recommenders, those titles are oftentimes less important than how well that recommender is able to convey their knowledge of you and your character. That's a great piece. And really that next question of having a veteran as a character reference, if that helps, sometimes it can, right? But it goes back down to not whether or not that recommender is a veteran, but it comes back down to that authenticity that recommender is able to convey in terms of who they're, in terms of how they are talking about you along those lines. So that is, that's key. Let's see. Tyler ask, what should my recommender be expecting? So they will not need to write a letter about you. What they should be expecting is they'll get an initial email from SurveyMonkey Apply. It'll actually look like it's coming, the title will be from the Pat Tillman Foundation. And then they'll have to set up an account within SurveyMonkey Apply. And then there'll be a series of approximately 5 questions that they will have to answer about you. So essentially, if it were an exam, they're sort of short essay questions that they will have approximately 100 to 150 words to, again, describe different aspects that sort of convey their understanding of your character, your proven track record, how you go about achieving goals, broad questions along those lines. So again, they don't have to create a letter on their own. In fact, they will not be able to submit a letter on their own, but they will have a questionnaire that they will respond to. And again, 3 specific questions, as our scholarships manager pointed out there. That's along those lines. Let's see. Again, I'm trying to keep some of the questions that we are addressing specifically focused here in terms of the application itself. If the topic were to come up, if someone's planning to continue their education following the completion of their current program, be viewed more favorably. that's it. Again, I hate to use sometimes the question that oftentimes lawyers or consultants will use when they say, well, that depends. That depends, right? To really highlight aspects of that particular question, it's important to really go back to the basic values of that selection committees, as well as your recommenders, need to be aware of and address. Shortly, in these next few weeks, you'll start to see we have a quick sort of one-page application information sheet. And it has a specific column that's on there. Or more importantly, you can go right now to the Pat Tillman Foundation website, and you can look at the how to apply, how to become a scholar page on that, and it highlights the values on which scholars are selected. In this specific case, when you are considering further education, even beyond your further program, one of the values we look at, to be quite frank, in terms of scholarship, we define as lifelong learning. Now, that is one value of 4 that people will be thinking about as they assess applications throughout the process, right? So it's that combination of service, which includes service both in and out of uniform, is this notion of scholarship, which again, along the lines of this particular question, when we're talking about lifelong learning, is clearly there. But then you're also very much need to be able to convey how you demonstrate humble leadership and then impact as well. So all 4 of those values are going to be very, very important, of which lifelong learning is clearly one of them as well. So there's a question in terms of being able to get feedback in terms of prior applications. We do have, I would direct you right now, simply as we're sort of in that final stretch of doing the final preparations for this next application cycle here at the foundation, I would direct you to our frequently asked questions. And then you can also send a quick email, and we have a summary of broad and general feedback that we look at and we assess each year that can I think very much help you hone in on doing a self-assessment along those lines. So again, I think those are all key questions and key points. We have just about 2.5 minutes remaining within this particular piece. If there are any additional questions that very much focus in again on this next application cycle, please go ahead and submit those now. The other aspects of things to consider that I'll just continue to reiterate is again the. You can think of them sort of like the 3 T's, right? You know, the first T is time, right? Think about the time impacts that are going to be going on throughout this entire process. We just had an information session at the Student of Veteran Affairs National Conference in LA. One of the Tillman scholars that was on there said she spent a dedicated amount of time of probably about 10 days out of those 30 solely working on that application. I think that is a key thing to keep in mind. That other piece is talk, right? Talk to us, but talk to that recommender, particularly in the context of this particular topic that's there. And then that third T, think about how is the best way to tie in a recommender, to tie in your essays, to tie in your resume, to tie in all those different parts of the application. What is the most complementary and effective way to tell a story using all those different parts? Remember those 3 T's, and then the big 5 when it comes to recommenders. Get your recommender started early, right? Stay in contact with your recommender. Number 2. 3, reach out to SurveyMonkey, apply for any technical difficulties. 4, that recommender has to submit their recommendation before you can submit your application. And 5, seek a complimentary message. Again, which I emphasized with that notion of tying things in. All those are key aspects as well. I think a couple of the other questions that were floating out there, our scholarships manager was able to get some responses to there as well. The final questions there, a little bit more on process. We'll address this again on February the 11th at 11:30 a.m. Central Time at our final information session, which will be right in the middle of the application session. So I imagine there'll be a lot of questions at that point in time. But the final question, just that your application, is it considered twice if you'll apply to a partner and a non-partner institution? And the answer is no. What you'll have to do is you'll have to make a choice in terms of which route, be it a university partner route or an at-large route, you want to apply to. So that's another sort of a specific question that you can reach out to us and lay out some of those details. Again, scholarships at pattillmanfoundation.org is probably the best way for that. But as January is moving very, very quickly through the books, so has this information section. We're right at the 30-minute mark. I want to go ahead and thank you for attending. Thank you for your continued interest in what is an amazing and remarkable opportunity. But most importantly, I want to thank you, whether you are a student veteran, a veteran who's about to become a student veteran, a military spouse, still serving whatever form. Thank you not only just for that service and what you've done, but thank you for what you are doing and what you will do in the future. And those things, in terms of the balance between the past, the present, but an emphasis on the future, is clearly at the heart of what we're looking for as we look to invest in talent for the future that's going to have an impact. That's at the heart of all that we do, and it'll certainly be at the heart of what a lot of people will be thinking about and writing about here in the months to come. So again, thank you for your time. We look forward if there's any additional questions. And again, February 11th, 11:30 a.m. Central Standard Time will be our final information session, and we'll address just basic, frequently asked questions about the application as a whole. Thanks again, and we'll see you next month.